Okay, tonight our group Bible study is letter number 5 from C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. We are also using the study guide by Mondo Gonzales. It's called the Screwtape Letters Study Guide. And there is a link to an Adobe, a PDF down in the description underneath the video if you would like to pull that up. I have taken, with Mondo Gonzales's permission, I have taken the chapter 5 questions and then went in and inserted the verses that he sends us to study for this chapter. And then on the screen, I have C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, and we will read that after we go through the themes and the synopsis and stuff like that. But before we start talking about the questions, we'll read the letter that's on the screen. So, the themes tonight, which are very timely for what we're going through: fear, anguish, despair, war, suffering, contented worldliness, growth through suffering, and faith. The synopsis: we are informed in this letter through the delirious joy of Wormwood that the humans have started another one of their wars, World War II. Screwtape, a veteran tempter, instructs his protege not to fall into the trap of enjoying this war too much. Instead, all tempters should be seeking to secure the soul and not get enamored by these minor victories of immediate fear and suffering of humans. Furthermore, it is argued by Screwtape that the verdict is still out on the long-term benefits of war. Wormwood and all tempters should remember that in the midst of this fear and suffering, humans are keenly reminded of their own mortality. This can have disastrous effects on their tempting because their enemy, which is God, is also using the war to draw people to himself. The objective for Screwtape is for all tempters to learn how to use, not enjoy, the war. Lewis is reminding us, I lost my place. I was worried about. Lewis is reminding us that spiritual temptation can come in any form, and our goal is to always draw closer to God. Additionally, those who are involved in a war might actually prepare themselves for death in anticipation of this exact event occurring. This situation for Screwtape borders on the worst of all situations. Instead, he would love for people to die unprepared in nursing homes where they have trained doctors, nurses, and friends lie to them and promise health and long life in the midst of a terminal prognosis, withheld for their own good. In fact, war renders useless one of their best weapons: contented worldliness. Lewis reminds us in the end of this letter that believers should not forget that various forms of suffering are inherent within God's plan of redemption. So the theological themes, a theme that becomes strikingly pervasive throughout this entire letter, is evidenced in how Screwtape is meticulously astute at getting to the point. Even though war consists of diverse afflictions in varying degrees, these are inconsequential in the sense of the ultimate. Lewis highlights for us the premise that no matter what good or evil occurs in our life, where we end up is what is of eternal value. Screwtape severely criticizes Wormwood for losing sight of that which is ultimately at stake, the human soul. We will scrutinize this more in the study questions and see what Jesus had to say about this sort of thinking. On a different topic, it is asserted by Screwtape that God has plainly told his saints that suffering is an essential part of his plan of redemption. What concerns us is whether this is true or not, and examining how plainly it has been told, if indeed it has. This is an issue of great importance, and one in which every believer will have to interact with while living in this fallen world. Does God indeed appoint suffering, trials for his children? To what end and through which means? Furthermore, even though Screwtape does not elaborate on the reasons why God allows suffering, he does use the opportunity to discuss what kind of faith it is that is grown out of suffering. This implies an assorted range of what faith really entails and how we seek to gain a faith that is worth the attempt to destroy. And so the vocabulary that we see in here: rhapsody, an intense expression of feeling or enthusiasm; bewilderment, a circumstance which is puzzling; draft, a glass or drink of a beverage; ardent, intensely devoted, eager, passionate; a pacifist, a person who is opposed to war or violence of any kind; myriads, an indefinitely great number of things, 10,000; toiling, hard work; barbarous, uncivilized, wild, savage, crude; sophistical, a subtle and tricky method of reasoning; partisans, supporters of a person, group, party, or cause; diffused, to spread or cause to spread in all directions; bereavement, the condition having been deprived of something or someone valued, especially through death. So now let's read the Screwtape letter number 5. It says, "My dear Wormwood, it is a little bit disappointing to expect a detailed report on your work and to receive instead such a vague rhapsody as your last letter. You say you are delirious with joy because the European humans have started another of their wars. I see very well what has happened to you. You are not delirious, you are only drunk, reading between the lines in your very unbalanced account of the patient's sleepless night. I can reconstruct your state of mind fairly accurately. For the first time in your career, you have tasted that wine which is the reward of all our labors, the anguish of soul, and it has gone to your head. I can hardly blame you. I did not expect old heads on young shoulders. Did the patient respond to some of your terror pictures of the future? Did you work in some good self-pitying glances at the happy past? Some fine thrills in the pit of his stomach were there. You played your violin prettily, didn't you? Well, it's all very natural. But do remember, Wormwood, that duty comes before pleasure. If any present self-indulgence on your part leads to the ultimate loss of the prey, you will be left eternally thirsting for that draught of which you are now so much enjoying your first sip. If, on the other hand, by steady and cool-headed application, here and now, you can finally secure his soul, he will then be yours forever. A brimful living chalice of despair and horror and astonishment which you can raise to your lips as often as you please. So do not allow any temporary excitement to distract you from the real business of undermining faith and preventing the formation of virtues. Give me without fail in your next letter a full account of the patient's reactions to the war, so that we can consider whether you are likely to do more good by making him an extreme patriot or an ardent pacifist. There are all sorts of possibilities. In the meantime, I must warn you not to hope too much from a war. Of course, a war is entertaining. The immediate fear and suffering of the humans is a legitimate and pleasing refreshment for our myriads of toiling workers. But what permanent good does it do us unless we make use of it for bringing souls to our Father below? When I see the temporal suffering of humans who finally escape us, I feel as if I had been allowed to taste the first course of a rich banquet and then denied the rest. It is worse than not to have tasted it at all. The enemy, true to his barbarous methods of warfare, allows us to see the short misery of his favorites, only to tantalize and torment us, to mock the incessant hunger, which during this present phase of the great conflict, his blockade is admittedly imposing. Let us therefore think rather how to use than how to enjoy this European war. For it has certain tendencies inherent in it which are in themselves by no means in our favor. We may hope for a good deal of cruelty and unchastity, but if we are not careful, we shall see thousands turning in this tribulation to the enemy, while tens of thousands who do not go so far as that will nevertheless have their attention diverted from themselves to values and causes which they believe to be higher than the self. I know that the enemy disapproves many of these causes, but that is where he is so unfair. He often makes prizes of humans who have given their lives for causes he thinks bad on the monstrously sophistical ground that the humans thought them good and were following the best they knew. Consider, too, what undesirable deaths occur in wartime. Men are killed in places where they knew they might be killed and to which they go. If they are at all of the enemy's party prepared, how much better for us if all humans died in costly nursing homes amid doctors who lie, nurses who lie, friends who lie, as we have trained them, promising life to the dying, encouraging the belief that sickness excuses every indulgence, and even if our workers know their job, withholding all suggestion of a priest lest it should betray to the sick man his true condition. And how disastrous for us is the continual remembrance of death which war enforces. One of our best weapons, contented worldliness, is rendered useless. In wartime, not even a human can believe that he is going to live forever. I know that Screwtape and others have seen in wars a great opportunity for attacks on faith, but I think that view was exaggerated. The enemy's human partisans have all been plainly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption, so that a faith which is destroyed by a war or a pestilence cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying. I am speaking now of diffused suffering over a long period, such as the war will produce. Of course, at the precise moment of terror, bereavement, or physical pain, you may catch your man when his reason is temporarily suspended. But even then, if he applies to enemy headquarters, I have found that the post is nearly always defended. Your affectionate Uncle Screwtape.
How God lines things up for us.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So in paragraph 1, we are introduced to the assessment that Wormwood is not really delirious with joy, but drunk. What does Screwtape mean by this?
He's drunk on his excitement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's overjoyed, I guess, with what he's seeing from his patient.
Yeah. The anguish and bewilderment of the human soul.
Mm-hmm.
And it has gone to his head.
Yeah.
So in paragraph 1, this is question 2. What is the ultimate issue regarding Screwtape strategies, and how would Jesus agree? Matthew 16:26 says, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" In Luke 9:25, we hear the same thing worded, "For what is a man advantaged if he gain the whole world and lose himself or be cast away?" What are the standards you use to determine the importance of the issues in your life and whether you are living with this attitude in mind? So what are the standards we use to determine the importance of the issues in your life and whether we are living with this attitude in mind?
Well, is that asking a direct question to us or more about what we... To me, it seems like it's more of a direct question.
To us.
Yeah, because it doesn't really have a paragraph or anything.
Yeah. I think we as women determine the importance of issues in our life. Again, going back to our seasons of life, like when our kids are little, our life revolves around the kids' needs, and then our kids get grown, and we can revolve more around our husband again, and maybe a career or whatever. And then we have, like in my own life, then the grandkids have come along, and now it's revolving around the grandkids. And so I think women go through seasons of how and what we place the hierarchy of importance on, more so than men, because I think men, it's usually taking care of the family,
right?
Being able to feed them, clothe them, house them, take care of them.
Yeah.
And that stays, I think, pretty steady.
Yeah. Well, I think for them, their aspect is, I go to work and I come home
and go play at whatever they play at.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I heard it put this time. It's different when a woman says she's going to go to bed, say at 9 o'clock, she says, I'm going to go to bed. Well, before she goes to bed, she unloads the dishwasher. She puts the food away. She makes sure the kids are tucked in, makes sure lunches are packed. So by 9:30, she's, crawling in bed. When a man says he's going to bed at 9 o'clock, at 9:01, he's in bed.
Yeah.
And it was like, yep. But.
And that's probably just a difference in the way that we word it. They've probably already done what they would do.
Yeah.
We're trying to dig our way out of a hole here. So let's move right along to question 3. In paragraph 1, Screwtape makes the claim that if Wormwood is successful at securing the patient's soul, he will forever be able to enjoy the torment of the patient at his leisure. How does this teaching compare with Scripture? Matthew 25:41 says, Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Screwtape makes the claim that if Wormwood is successful at securing the patient's soul, he will forever be able to enjoy the torment of the patient at his leisure.
Because he'll be in hell.
Right.
So he'll get to see all the days of his life.
In Matthew 8:29, And behold, they cried out, saying, What have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God? Art thou come hither to torment us before the time? And then Revelation 20:10, And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. We, as Christians, we put a heavy emphasis on, well, we've repented, we've changed, we're following Jesus, we're going to live forever. But technically, everybody lives forever. Technically, everybody lives forever. They just either live in heaven or they live in hell.
Yeah. Your destination is important.
Yes. So we sometimes, I think, I don't know, maybe word that wrong for people that we're trying to witness to, maybe. Because I think one of the first things that people have to understand is you're going to live forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when most people refer to eternity, they don't typically refer to eternity in hell.
Right.
Because nobody wants to see a loved one or a friend or anybody spend eternity in hell. And so it's kind of just comes more across as eternity in heaven. But yeah, there is the flip side of it. There's the other side of it. And unfortunately, there will be people who will flat out renounce God and not have any remorse about it whatsoever, and that's where they will spend their eternity. And it's sad to think that, because I mean, even just those 3 verses right there, and there's, obviously the Bible's full of so many more of them, but just reading those, it, for one, it makes you glad on the fact that, you'll be going to heaven and that you don't have to see that, but then it makes you sad on the fact that there are people who will never see heaven. That's all that they will know, because their hearts are already hardened to that.
So when we have people hold back or hesitate on giving their life to Jesus because they know that a loved one hasn't, and I've dealt with people saying this to me. What do you say to them?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't had that happen, but I would think our response would be, you still have to live your life and get your life right. Because here's the thing. Maybe the order that things are to happen is that person is to come to Jesus first and the other will follow. Because a lot of times people want to see your relationship and your fruit with God before they will change their walk with God. They want to see it in action before they make that decision. And that blows my mind. I can't wrap my head around that. But it's kind of, well, you go across the bridge first. If you make it, then I'll go.
You jump.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's kind of that mentality. But I haven't experienced that with anybody yet.
I remember when I wasn't very, very old, but I had to have been at least close to being an adult. I had to have been an adult, young adult. My mom and I was having a conversation about lost loved ones that, we may or may not have known. Anyway, we got on the subject of heaven. And when we get there, and she said, well, there's no more tears in heaven. And I was like, okay. And she said, and this may or may not be a comfort to people, I don't know, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway, because it rang with some truth, because there's no more tears in heaven. She said, I don't believe we'll know who doesn't make it. And I was like,
I don't think we will know. I mean, I don't think we'll be sitting there and then look around and where's because it's the joy and the love and just everything that's going to surround us. I don't think there's going to be any room for the sorrow.
The all-consuming love of God
Yeah.
is going to be so, which we should be living our lives in such a way here, because then it would be that much more visible to everyone around us.
Yeah.
And our job is to bring Jesus to people and people to Jesus.
Right.
And if we were living in that all-consuming joy of the Lord and love of the Lord, that all-consuming love, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, then it would flow out and over from your life, from my life, from everyone's life, that was living that way.
Yeah, very true.
Question number 4. In paragraph 1, we are told that Wormwood has become overly delirious with the anguish occurring as a result of the war. However, he has been instructed not to let any temporary excitement distract him from the real business of demons. What is this, and how does it compare with 1 Thessalonians 2:18, which says, "Wherefore we would have come unto you, even I, Paul, once and again, but Satan hindered us." And then in Matthew 13:18 through 23, it says, "You then listen to the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word about the kingdom and doesn't understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is the one sown along the path. And the one sown on rocky ground, this is one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no root in himself, but is short-lived. When pressure or persecution comes because of the word, immediately he stumbles. Now the one sown among the thorns, this is one who hears the word, but the worries of this age and the seduction of wealth choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. But the one sown on the good ground, this is one who hears and understands the word, who does bear fruit and yields some 100, some 60, some 30 times what was sown." And then 2 Timothy 2:26 says, "Then they may come to their senses and escape the devil's trap, having been captured by him to do his will." And then Revelation 12:9 and 10 says, "So the great dragon was thrown out, the ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. He was thrown to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, The salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah have now come, because the accuser of our brothers has been thrown out, the one who accuses them before our God day and night." And what should our response be? 2 Corinthians 2:11 says, "Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices." I included one of Andrew Womack's notes here on 2 Corinthians 2:11. It says, "The principles found in this verse bring great understanding to the believer in effectively dealing with the devil and his host." Paul was stating that unforgiveness is one of the major ways that the devil gets an advantage over us. The word advantage carries the idea of one who would be in a relatively favorable or superior position. It is possible for Satan to get the advantage over us, or Paul would not have said this. Basically, any sin gives Satan an opening into our lives. However, the sin of unforgiveness is given special attention by the Lord Jesus and his half-brother James. Their teachings leave no doubt that unforgiveness is a luxury none of us can afford. Unforgiveness is not only detrimental to others, but it also delivers us over to the tormentors. Satan takes advantage of unforgiveness. It says, notice what Paul did not say here. He did not say that we were supposed to have PhDs in demonology. Some have used this verse to justify focusing on Satan and his activity to an inordinate degree. This will actually encourage demonic activity and become a device that Satan can use against us. Paul said we should not be ignorant of Satan's devices. We certainly need to know that the devil and demons exist, and we need to recognize when we are facing demonic activity. But we need to keep our focus on the Lord. Some people who do excessive spiritual warfare actually spend more time talking to the devil each day than they do talking to God, and that's not right. The best defense against the devil is to be so God-centered that we give no place to Satan. Those of us who are very sensitive to the devil's presence usually do so at the expense of being sensitive to the Lord's presence. David said, "If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there." Anytime Satan's oppression is there, God's presence is there too. It's just a matter of which one we focus on. Focusing on the devil is a trick of the devil. The word devices carries the idea of a plan, scheme, or an evil purpose. We must resist the devil by renouncing his schemes, confessing any known sin, and forgiving those who have offended us. We shouldn't wait until we feel like forgiving because it will never happen. Forgiveness is a choice. Because God has forgiven us in Christ, we need to decide to give that forgiveness to others. In doing so, Satan will lose his advantage over us. And all of that came from Andrew Womack's Living Commentary.
And that's so true, because I mean, as Christians, we have to acknowledge, I mean, there's good and bad. There's God and there's the devil. And that's as far as we need to go with that. There's no other part of us that needs to dig any further than just knowing that the devil exists. And there are some people that just, I mean, they worship the devil like we worship God.
Yeah.
And it does. It just opens up spheres for those spiritual attacks, whether it consumes that person themselves or they consume somebody else. I mean, but it's just opening up the atmosphere for those spirits to coexist and to give them power. That's the other side of it, is when you open yourself up to those, you are giving those spirits power, as opposed to God and the archangels and the angels that surround us. I mean, it's the same thing. While worshiping God, and we open ourselves to his protection, to his angels, to all of that.
Well, it's just like we were just talking about, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And if you're doing that, it's an all-encompassing love that outflows from you. It's your speech, the words of your mouth come from your heart. And so, therefore, if you are consumed with God's love, the words from your mouth are going to be in praise to God more often than anything else. Right. And that praise, that verbal praise, builds up the army of angels around us. And they fight for us all the harder. It empowers them. Whereas if we start speaking negative and speaking devil and speaking evil and speaking, of this and that and the other, it empowers the other side to start winning that battle. Yeah. Ephesians 6:11 says, "Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil." And we remember that, that starts with the belt of truth, and the breastplate of righteousness, and the shoes of peace, and the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. 2 Peter 1:5-8 says, "For this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with goodness, goodness with knowledge, knowledge with self-control, self-control with endurance, endurance with godliness, godliness with brotherly affection, and brotherly affection with love. For if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they will keep you from being useless or unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ."
Well, and that very order of goodness, knowledge, self-control, I mean,
that's what we were just talking about. Yeah. Too.
And all of that is fleeting. I mean, the self-control of people nowadays, I mean, the anger issues, people flying off the handle, the seduction that happens outside of marriages. I mean, just the different things that are going on. And it's just like you're just sitting there looking like it's. I don't know. There's days where I just feel like I'm standing back and I just see a movie screen going in front of me
Mm-hmm.
of all of this stuff that's going on, and I'm like,
All of the nastiness.
yes, and it's just like, really, is this
Mm-hmm.
happening? Is this really happening?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question number 5. In paragraph 1, Screwtape notes that there are 2 types of people he would be interested in transforming the patient into due to the war. Which are they, and how does each type contribute to a sense of weakness as it relates to the war?
Paragraph 1.
Mm-hmm. If, on the other hand, by steady and cool-headed application, here and now, you can finally secure his soul, he will then be yours. A brimful living chalice of despair and horror and astonishment, which you can raise to your lips as often as you please. Oh, extreme patriot or ardent pacifist.
Yeah.
I've wondered about this. I've had questions because, you know, we are dealing with war again out in the world, and it's a major, I mean, there's always wars going on, but this is a pretty major thing. You know, extreme patriot or ardent pacifist.
Well, I think our country even if we take the war out of it and just look at what our own government has been doing to people and the mandates and the pushes and everything they've been, it has, again, the whole division exactly of what they want, the division of things that happen, that's also what we are divided into, either a patriot or pacifist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much what we've been divided. Taking the war out of it, we're already divided into that.
Right.
And I can totally see where, man, this is like, we're living this out.
So, why does Screwtape instruct Wormwood not to hope too much from the war? It says, compare Isaiah 55, 8 through 11 to Romans 8, 28. Isaiah 55, 8 through 11, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, and your ways are not my ways. This is the Lord's declaration. For as heaven is higher than earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For just as rain and snow fall from heaven and do not return there without saturating the earth and making it germinate and sprout, and providing seed to sow and food to eat, so my word that comes from my mouth will not return to me empty, but it will accomplish what I please and will prosper in what I send it to do. And in Romans, I did 26 through 28 of chapter 8 because verse 28 starts with and or therefore, which is a conjunction. It ties it to what has been said before. And when those verses start like that, you can't really separate them without taking them out of context.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
So 26 through 28 says, likewise, the Spirit also helps our infirmities. For we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And he that searcheth the hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose.
Well, I think to go back then to the question,
of comparing those.
I think Screwtape is telling Wormwood that because he already knows in the instance of war, more people are likely to turn to God than away from God.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that means less patience for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why he is saying, because there again is that one, like you said, you can't take that out of context, but then, all things work together for good to them that love God.
Mm-hmm.
And even if somebody didn't have a continued relationship with God or hadn't, kind of the saying, there's no atheist in a foxhole. It kind of comes down to that at some point in time, when things get bad enough and you get desperate enough, you are going to acknowledge God. You could have gone all your life, but when it gets down to it, and people that are on their deathbed, people that are, know that their life is about to end, they always come back around to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's his meaning on that, is that he knows that with the war looming, that this particular patient could lean more towards putting more faith and more of himself into God.
Now, like, puts it right in front of our face.
Yeah.
Death.
Yes, without a doubt.
Death and eternity are
Yes.
right in front of our face. It's like you've been slapped upside the head.
Absolutely.
With death and eternity. Absolutely. When you're in that situation.
Yeah.
Whether it's illness, or whether, a plague that we've all been dealing with, or war, it puts death and eternity right in front of your face.
Yeah.
Question number 6. In paragraph 2, what does it mean when Screwtape mentions the barbarous methods of his enemy in allowing misery to his favorites? Hebrews 11:35-39 says, women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. And then Luke 11:49-51, therefore also said the wisdom of God, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they shall slay and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation, from the blood of Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, which perished between the altar and the temple. Verily I say unto you, it shall be required of this generation. And then Acts 7:50-55, did not my hand make all these things? You stiff-necked people with uncircumcised hearts and ears, you are always resisting the Holy Spirit, as your ancestors did, so do you. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? They even killed those who announced beforehand the coming of the righteous one, whose betrayers and murderers you have now become. You received the law under the direction of angels, and yet have not kept it. When they heard these things, they were enraged in their hearts and gnashed their teeth at him. But Stephen, filled by the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven. He saw God's glory, with Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, and then question number 6. What do you think is the enemy's blockade? Job 1, 10 through 12. Haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face. Very well, the Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, you must not lay a hand on Job himself. So Satan left the Lord's presence. In Job 2:6, and the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. And Luke 22:31 says, Simon, Simon Peter, listen, Satan has asked excessively that all of you be given up to him out of the power and keeping of God, that he might sift all of you like grain. I'd never read the Amplified and gotten the all of you out of that. I always thought that Jesus was talking just to Simon, to Peter. And but the Amplified implies that he was telling Peter, but it was about all of them.
All of them. Well, and to kind of go back to some of those questions, I think they know, even as demons, that God has more power than them, because they say that, you know, in their his blockade is admittedly imposing, knowing that God's shelter and his love and his presence around somebody is a bigger blockade than what either of these demons could possibly possess. And they know that they have a short timeline to have to work in to get into the patient's psyche, really, for all intents and purposes. I mean, because they have to work through the mind to try to change their way of thinking than to change their heart. But I think they know that they have a short amount of time to work in.
And the prophets, the first part of the question had to do with allowing misery to his favorites, to God's favorites. The prophets and the believers who died heinous deaths, you know, tortured and sawed asunder and things. That works against the demons also, because it solidifies. It's like you said with the earlier question of, you cross the bridge first, and then we'll see. You know, and it gets people who have been watching these people to make a decision.
Yeah.
It's a call for a decision.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, it's, I don't know if I want to use hard on the demons, but kind of gets them excited, because like he says here, it only tantalizes and torments us to mock the incessant hunger, because they see or saw what his favorites went through and thinking, oh, they're sitting there rubbing their hands together thinking, okay, any minute they're going to turn their back on God. Any minute. And then they're ours. They're ours. Bounce. They're ours. We're going to go after them. And that is true even to this point. I mean, you have not only the demons, thirsting after you, but you have people waiting and watching sometimes of are they going to fall, or how are they going to make it through this? What is their reaction going to be? What are they going to do?
Right. And those people that are waiting and watching have their own angels and demons working on them.
Yeah.
Yes. The cartoon characters that they had with us when we were growing up, that had an angel on one side and a demon on the other side. That's almost truth. I mean,
it is.
We have angels pulling for us and saying, come this way, and then the demons over there, come this way. And we forget how close to we've made that a funny when it's actually truth, which works in the demon's favor.
Yeah.
Because we've made that a funny.
Sure.
When it's actually truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Question number 7. In paragraph 2, explain the thinking of Screwtape in wishing all humans to die in costly nursing homes. Discuss the suggestion that every sickness excuses every indulgence. His verbiage in the paragraph was that, when people are sick, we go in and rather than build them up as warriors by putting armor on them. Oh, it's okay, you're diabetic, but here's some ice cream. Go ahead and kill yourself because I know you want ice cream so bad. You want this birthday cake, and it's full of sugar, and it's what's killing you.
Yep. Yeah. But here you go.
But here you go. You're dying anyway.
Take a double portion.
Take a double portion. Yes. I hate that, I could get on a soapbox really fast over eating, because that's one of my major issues, is eating, and I have to deal with that, and it's hard, and people don't see that as a sin. It's just eating, and if you overeat, you just get fat as far as they're concerned. Well, gluttony is a sin, just like drunkenness is, just like all the other sins, and the other thing I like, we can choose to eat ourselves into an early grave. We can choose to drink ourselves into an early grave. We can choose to sex ourselves into an early grave. Those are not God's fault.
No, they're not.
Those are from the choices that we make. And I'm sorry, but we got all over my soapbox here. So
it's true though, but I think too, like what he says in here, as far as amid doctors who lie, nurses who lie, friends who lie, as we have trained them, promising life to the dying, encouraging the belief that sickness excuses every indulgence. But I think there's also that, everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. It's all okay. Instead of teaching, look, your blood sugars are at this, whatever. Put the cupcakes down. Walk away from them. Instead of getting that serious one-on-one with them and saying, you are going to kill yourself. Plain and simple. You're going to kill yourself if you don't take better control of this, if you don't do this, if you don't do that. And I know it's harder to say that to somebody who may be there with cancer, no fault of their own, whatever came about. And it's harder to have that conversation with somebody. However, you come in, like you said, and put that armor.
Mm-hmm.
You build that armor around them, and you pray for them, and you build them up to
In
where they
faith.
yes, to where they can then start applying their own armor.
Yes.
And sometimes we get to that point where as an individual we're weak, we're consumed with worry, although we're not supposed to be, but we're consumed with all of those type things, and we need people to come in and put armor on us until we're strong enough
Mm-hmm.
to begin building our own armor.
It's just like Moses during the battle with was it the Ammonites, or when her
When
and
he's-
Aaron
As
held
long
his
as his
arms
were
up,
yeah,
they were winning.
they were winning. Yeah.
And sometimes we need other believers coming in and holding our arms up in
Mhm.
faith.
Mm-hmm.
And, faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. And we need more word of God given to the people, not opinions, the word.
Mm-hmm.
The word of God, the promises of God, the declarations of God, the word needs to be given to people in these situations. In building up their faith and helping them to overcome these things.
Yeah.
I remember, and I still tell this story, my mom was on her deathbed from cancer in the nursing home, and she went through a time frame when she determined that she was going to be healed and she was going to get out of her bed, and she was acting on faith, trying to get out of bed, and my brothers were like, "Mom, you can't get out of bed." and it's funny, but it's not funny.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah.
Because, we needed that holding each other up.
Yeah.
We needed.
Well, she was trying to enact what she knew to be what God wanted her, to do that, take those steps. Take those steps. But yeah, sometimes we come through, and instead of helping, we hinder.
Yes, we do.
We can hinder sometimes.
Yeah, and even though I know that she's in a better place, but we hindered her, and it's sad. So
yeah.
Romans 14:7-8 says, "For we don't live for ourselves or die for ourselves. If we live, it's to honor the Lord, and if we die, it's to honor the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord." In 1 Corinthians 10:31, "So then, whether you eat or drink, or whatever you may do, do all for the honor and glory of God."
All over it.
Yeah. It's question number 8. In paragraph 2, Screwtape spends much time talking about death. What are the implications when he says one of our best weapons, contented worldliness, is rendered useless? Contented worldliness.
Well, I think we have to back up a sentence, a thing. So, how disastrous for us is the continual remembrance of death, which war enforces. One of our best weapons, contented worldliness, is rendered useless. Because, one more time, not even a human can believe that he's going to live forever. I think what I get out of it is that in the presence of this time with World War II and all of that going on, people then set aside that selfishness, self-centeredness, blindness, they set all of those things aside, and then they view the world completely different, and they see people in a different light. Your neighbors that you probably hadn't talked to or even acknowledged in over a year, you see their loved one gearing up and going out as a soldier, and then it brings reality to you that they may never see that person again.
Right.
And so it brings the world together as one, as opposed to separating it. Kind of the way we are right now. Most people are worried about TikTok and Facebook and what bachelor's doing what, or bachelorette, or whatever, or who's on Survivor, or it's just those different type things. It's
Yellowstone.
A numbness.
Yeah.
It's a numbness of something that we've become a society of entertainment.
We have.
A society of complete entertainment. And therefore, with that, we have a society of broken, devastated homes, because there's not that glue, that bond there anymore. And, the devil started working on that several years ago. I think we kind of talked about that last time.
Yeah.
When women had to go back to work and join the workforce, because again, we were dealing with war. So he began breaking up homes a long time ago.
Yeah.
And he's still succeeding in it.
Yeah. It seems like our next vacation is always what's on our mind, and where we're going to go, what we're going to do. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Whereas real life realities set in.
Yeah. Well, and the more that I've been out and talking with people and been in the public and stuff, there's a lot of disconnect of what's going on. And I know some of it has to do, I get the fact that people's lives are busy. I understand that. But we also still have to stay connected.
Yeah.
We have to stay connected with the things that are happening and going on, and realize that we truly are living in unprecedented times.
Yeah.
And things change right now. Things are changing so fast. You look at something 1 minute, and then it's changing the very next minute. And it comes at you quickly. And it is a lot to process.
It's those birth pains.
Yes.
And we're in like the 8th.
Oh my gosh.
The 8th, whatever it's called on the circle.
Oh, the
dilation.
Yeah.
Dilation 8.
Yeah.
Or 9 or 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. That baby's coming.
Yeah, it is.
That baby's coming. So.
Yeah.
He says to compare 1 John 2:15 through 17 to James 4:4. 1 John 2:15 through 17 says, "Do not love the world or the things that belong to the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in him. For everything that belongs to the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride in one's lifestyle, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world with its lust is passing away, but the one who does God's will remains forever." Yeah, we were all over that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when we go out and we start saying, look up, our hope, he's coming. He's our
Mhm.
blessed hope, and here he comes. He's coming soon. I mean, I don't know if it's a month, I don't know if it's 5 years, but he's coming soon.
He's coming.
And people are like, "Oh, I'm not ready for him to come. You know, I want my kids to grow up and get married. I want grandkids. I want this, I want that." And I'm like, "Okay, those are all good things,
Mhm.
but Jesus is Jesus, and Jesus is better."
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I think he trumps all that.
he trumps all that.
Yeah.
James 4:4 says, "Adulteresses, don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? So whoever wants to be the world's friend becomes God's enemy."
Mhm.
That's kind of
Yeah.
it's kind of scary because
It
you know
is.
when we do get to where we're enjoying this world so much that we take our eyes off of God and the time of the age that we're living in, we can get caught up in the love of this world. We
Yeah.
can get caught up in what's going on around us instead of, you know, especially in America where we have life relatively easy.
Mhm.
And I would say that all of our Bible study girls have life relatively easy. You know, we don't have to worry about food and clothing and shelter. You know, we're all in that position. It's easy to get caught up in the next football game or whatever's going on today,
Yeah.
and just kind of in a manner of speaking, put God on a shelf.
Yeah.
You know, I'll be back later.
Yeah.
And just not how it works.
No, it's not.
Question number 9 in paragraph 3, which means I've got to change pages, I think. In paragraph 3, Screwtape says, "The enemy's human partisans have all been plainly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption." Screwtape says, "The enemy's human partisans have all been plainly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption."
Mhm.
So it says, compare Philippians 1:29, which says, "For it has been given to you on Christ's behalf not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him." Acts 5:41 says, "Then they went out from the presence of the Sanhedrin, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to be dishonored on behalf of the name." Acts 14:22 says, "Establishing and strengthening the souls and the hearts of the disciples," believers, "urging and warning and encouraging them to stand firm in the faith, and telling them that it is through many hardships and tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God." James 1:2-12, "Consider it wholly joyful, my brethren, whenever you are enveloped in or encounter trials of any sort or fall into various temptations. Be assured and understand that the trial and proving of your faith bring out endurance and steadfastness and patience. But let endurance and steadfastness and patience have full play, and do a thorough work, so that you may be people perfectly and fully developed, with no defects, lacking in nothing. If any of you is deficient in wisdom, let him ask of the giving God, who gives to everyone liberally and ungrudgingly, without reproaching or fault finding, and it will be given him. Only it must be in faith that he asks, with no wavering, no hesitating, no doubting. For the one who wavers, hesitates, doubts, is like the billowing surge out at sea that is blown hither and thither and tossed by the wind. For truly, let not such a person imagine that he will receive anything that he asks for from the Lord. For being as he is a man of two minds, hesitating, dubious, irresolute, He is unstable and unreliable and uncertain about everything he thinks, feels, and decides. Let the brother in humble circumstances glory in his elevation as a Christian called to the true riches and to be an heir of God. And the rich person ought to glory in being humbled by being shown his human frailty, because like the flower of the grass, he will pass away. For the sun comes up with a scorching heat and parches the grass. Its flower falls off, and its beauty fades away. Even so will the rich man wither and die in the midst of his pursuits. Blessed is the man who is patient under trial and stands up under temptation. For when he has stood the test and been approved, he will receive the victor's crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. In 1 Peter 4:12-19, says, Dear friends, don't be surprised when the fiery ordeal comes among you to test you as if something unusual were happening to you. Instead, rejoice as you share in the sufferings of the Messiah, so that you may also rejoice with great joy at the revelation of his glory. If you are ridiculed for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. None of you, however, should suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, or a meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he should not be ashamed, but should glorify God in having that name. For the time has come for judgment to begin with God's household. And if it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who disobey the gospel of God? And if a righteous person is saved with difficulty, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? So those who suffer according to God's will should, while doing what is good, entrust themselves to a faithful Creator. And then 1 Thessalonians 3:2-4. And we sent Timothy, our brother and God's co-worker in the gospel of Christ, to strengthen and encourage you concerning your faith, so that no one will be shaken by these persecutions. For you yourselves know that we are appointed to this. In fact, when we were with you, we told you previously that we were going to suffer persecution, and as you know, it happened. It says to ask ourselves whether this is something you have accepted and are seeing the Lord use in your understanding of Him. You know, one of the Andrew Womack's commentaries pointed out that being mocked and being basically persecuted by opinion and words and stuff is some of the most frequent persecutions that we as Christians go through. You know, people will call us crazy and they'll separate themselves from us. And it wants to know if this is something that we have accepted and are seeing. And yes, the answer to that is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes and yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay, because he also calls us to, as believers, to separate ourselves from worldliness, and yet not to the extent that we're not going out and being his light and working to pull other people to him.
Right.
Because I've seen that to extreme too, where, you know, people extremely separate themselves.
Yeah.
In the name of Christianity, or, you know, following the Lord.
Well,
so
I think in situations like that, they get tied up in legalism.
Yes.
And those type things, because then they eventually put themselves on their own pedestal and separate themselves from doing the very thing that God has called them to do,
Mm-hmm.
and to be the person and the light, and to be used as his vessel to do what he sees fit.
You know what I see, the other thing, the flip side of that is, and I'm gonna use like the Amish as an example. They separate themselves to such a degree and don't deal with what they call the Englishers, the Gentiles, I guess, is
Mhm.
what it's called biblically, which they're not Jews, but you know, you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They separate themselves to such a degree that they're not dealing face to face, person to person with the persecution. They've separated themselves off to where they don't have to deal with it.
Right.
So I think it can be, you know, taken to extreme and used in a bad way. But yeah, I it makes me sad when people laugh at my faith or scoff,
Mm-hmm.
or you know, whatever. It makes me sad,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, but it doesn't stop me from having that. It doesn't. It
Right.
doesn't. It's just part of life.
Yeah.
You just deal with them. You
Yeah.
just go on.
Yeah, and you know, and that's a lifelong lesson in dealing with that. I mean, because there's so many things throughout life that, you know, made fun of and this and that, but I think sometimes when it comes to faith, it's a little more hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the sadness comes from knowing what they're missing out on. I mean, it's harder as a baby Christian, and I think that's what turns a lot of people away when they're baby Christians and they are attacked that way
Mm-hmm.
and made fun of and stuff, and it's easier for them to turn away because they haven't built that foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who's built that foundation and that relationship with God, and people come at them like that, it's not really going to deter which way they go, but there's the sadness of, if you only knew the Jesus that I know.
Mm-hmm.
If you only knew how much he loved you and wanted you and wants you to come back to him. It's that kind of hurt. It's not a personal hurt. It's a heart hurt.
And you know, I think you and I and some of the other class members have talked about before, when God called his people Israel out of Egypt. They then had to wander through the wilderness, and it ended up being a 40-year wandering through the wilderness because of their disobedience. But God took them out into the wilderness, and before it even became, you know, the 40 years, he showed them himself over and over and over again. But it was it was through, you know, okay, well, now we're up against the sea, the Red Sea, and they're coming to get us. And so God parted the waters. And then they get through that, and it's just days later that there's no water, and oh, you brought us out here and you're just gonna kill us and we're just gonna die of you know, and then God provides water out of a rock. You know, and if we're honest and we look back on all the way to our baby Christianity, we were led through our own wilderness journey.
Absolutely.
We encountered the Red Sea. We encountered the drought and the desert and the hunger, and it may not have been actual, you know, thirst for literal water or hunger for literal food.
Yeah.
But we've encountered those things to grow into the Christian that's no longer a baby. That's now
right.
a meat fed
Yeah.
Christian. And
yeah. If you truly go back and look at it, yes, you're absolutely right. Every person's going to have that Red Sea. They're going to have all of those moments in their
they
life.
have that testimony.
Every last one.
Every mature Christian has a testimony of moments when they had to have faith, when they had to stand on that faith. There's more to that question. I know we may have already all been all over it, but
take and examine the various kinds of suffering.
I mean, there's illness and war and we've kind of been all over that. So, but there was some more scriptures that we haven't read yet.
Yeah.
1 Peter 4, 1-2 says, "Therefore, since Christ suffered in the flesh, equip yourselves also with the same resolve, because the one who suffered in the flesh has finished with sin, in order to live the remaining time in the flesh no longer for human desires, but for God's will." And I think that's kind of what we were just talking about. You reach a point when you've been through stuff and you just know that God's got this.
Yeah.
Whatever this is, God's got it.
Yeah. I mean, it takes a while to build to that because, again, we have that years in the wilderness that we have to learn. He's going to handle it.
Yeah.
It's the patiently waiting. It's the standing in faith. It's the asking, not begging. And back to the patience. You know, I mean, it always comes back to the patience, and to know that, back to the scripture of my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. I mean, what we think we want an outcome to be, God's got something better.
Right.
And so when that thought that we have to understand not to be disappointed in it, to know, oh, wait a minute, I didn't think big enough. I didn't get outside my box. I stayed in my little box. God went bigger and better and brighter, and you know, so it's also not getting down because, gee, thanks a lot, God. That didn't go the way I thought it was going to.
Yeah.
That's not usually how it is.
Hebrews 5, 7 and 8 says, "During his earthly life, he offered prayers and appeals with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Though he was God's son, he learned obedience through what he suffered." Luke 9, 23-25 says, "Then he said to them all, 'If anyone wants to come with me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life because of me will save it. What is a man benefited if he gains the whole world, yet loses or forfeits himself?'" And Hebrews 12, 2-11 says, "Keeping our eyes on Jesus, the source and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that lay before him endured a cross and despised the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of God's throne. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, so that you won't grow weary and lose heart. In struggling against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And you have forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons. My son, do not take the Lord's discipline lightly, or faint when you are reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and punishes every son he receives. Endure suffering as discipline. God is dealing with you as sons. For what son is there that a father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, which all receive, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had natural fathers discipline us, and we respected them. Shouldn't we submit even more to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time based on what seemed good to them, but he does it for our benefit so that we can share his holiness. No discipline seems enjoyable at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it yields the fruit of peace and righteousness to those who have been trained by it. And then they also referenced the entire book of Job, which we're not going to read. But it did make me feel good that they wanted you to read the entire book in its entirety, because if you take pieces and parts out of Job, you are very highly likely using them out of context, which is not a good thing. It starts out, anyway, Job gets to the point where he says, "Oh God, I did not know you," and he admits and he says, "Now I know you."
But it was through that pain and suffering and discipline, that wilderness, no different
that we were
than
talking
what
about.
we've got. I mean, that's where we as a group have traveled ourselves. I mean, through the pain and the discipline and the knowing God, and we're still learning, and still growing, because we'll never fully know God.
Right. Our mind can't even begin to fathom. I mean, it's a pea-sized mind. If that. It's a mustard seed. I mean,
it's true, though.
Question number 10. In paragraph 3, what does Screwtape mean when he says, "So that a faith which is destroyed by a war or a pestilence cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying"? And how does this compare with 1 John 5:4? Are you demonstrating this foundation in your life? So that a faith which is destroyed by a war or a pestilence cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying.
Well, and the sentence after that says, "I am speaking now of diffused suffering over a long period, such as the war will produce."
And of course, at the precise moment of terror, bereavement, or physical pain, you may catch your man when his reason is temporarily suspended. But even then, if he applies to enemy headquarters, I have found that the post is nearly always defended.
I guess
because when we are attacked by war or pestilence, they think attack them with war and pestilence, but that turns us back to God. And so he's saying cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying. Because being the older demon that's training the younger demons, he's like, that doesn't work. That doesn't turn them. It turns them the wrong way. Is that what that's saying?
Well, I'm kind of catching it in a different aspect. So that a faith which is destroyed, so if you take this patient right now where he's at, in this war that's going on, and the war, it destroys his faith. It's that pestilence that destroys his faith. Then to me, he's saying as the demon, well, it was a waste of our time, basically, to go after him because his faith was never strong enough to begin with.
Oh.
So instead of being able to play that cat and mouse game with him, he crumbled.
Okay.
Is that's how so that a faith which is destroyed by a war or a pestilence cannot really have been worth the trouble of destroying. So therefore they didn't get their fun out of it because he didn't go.
It wasn't faith anyway.
Yeah, his faith.
It wasn't faith to begin with.
Exactly.
And our God is a God of faith.
Right.
And if you don't have faith, you don't have God.
Right. Right. That's how I read it.
Okay. So 1 John 5, and I did 3 through 5. For this is what love for God is, to keep his commands. Now, his commands are not a burden because, and there's one of those conjunctions. That's why I have more than just that one verse. Because whatever has been born of God conquers the world. This is the victory that has conquered the world, our faith. And who is the one who conquers the world but the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? Yes,
Yeah.
I think you were reading that correctly.
Yeah. So without ever having that foundation and that basis of faith, it was like, yeah, they were going to fall anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. They could have just sat back and laughed at them anyway.
Yeah.
Not messed with them.
Mm-hmm.
So number 11, in paragraph 3, Screwtape says that in times of distress, our reason is temporarily suspended, but that if we apply to the enemy's headquarters, it is almost always defended. What is the significance and biblical justification for Screwtape asserting this?
Well, if you back it up, which you'd read it earlier, of course, at this precise moment of terror, bereavement, or physical pain, you may catch your man when his reason is temporarily suspended. But even then, if he applies to enemy headquarters, which means goes to God, I have found that the post is nearly always defeated. So, I mean, when somebody's facing that moment of terror, their life is flashing before their eyes, or they've lost somebody else, or they have physical pain to themselves, that they're going to cling to God. Back to that, there's no atheist in a foxhole.
Yeah.
They're going to reach out to God. It's built in us. It just is. It's built in us like that hole that we've had at some point in our life that people in the world have in their life, but they could never fill it. No matter the alcohol, the marriages, the relationships, the sex, the drugs, the food,
don't leave mine out.
Yeah. Medications, any addiction out there. It goes back to that very thing, is that it's in us to look to God, because he designed us. He made us. He knows the number of hairs on our head, even though we lose 100 of them a day. He still knows that count. He knows everything about us every second of the day. And how can you not be made in his image and not reach out to him? It's just inherent. It's in us. So, yeah, the headquarters will always be defended.
Yeah. I loved this verse, which is going to close us out, but it sure does sum up what we've been learning. And I pulled it from the King James and the Amplified because there was things I wanted from both of those. The King James starts with, let your conversation be. Let your speech speak. Say these things without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. For he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Let your conversation say, God is for me, not against me. He is with me. He's not going to leave me.
Yeah.
Hebrews 13:5 in the Amplified. Let your character or moral disposition be free from love of money, including greed, avarice, lust, and craving for earthly possessions, and be satisfied with your present circumstances and with what you have. For he, God, himself has said, I will not in any way fail you, nor give you up, nor leave you without support. I will not in any degree leave you helpless, nor forsake, nor let you down. Relax my hold on you. Assuredly not.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that one too.
Yeah. And that's something to go back, especially in these days, in the days that are coming, in everything that is coming down, everything that is happening, all prophecy that is coming true, to know God knows our situation. He knows us. He knows our heart. He knows everything. It's like COVID. He already knew that this was going to come. He designed our bodies to be able to adapt and defeat and conquer. He designed the people to help with the medications, to help with that. I mean, he orchestrated every bit of it. This is no surprise to him.
Right.
No surprise whatsoever. And that's the thing, is nothing will ever be a surprise to him.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
Even anything that we do will never be a surprise to him. But to just know that verse, that he'll never leave us nor forsake us. Ever.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great ending. We have no reason to fear or anguish or despair because he'll never leave us nor forsake us. So